Hi everybody, and welcome to this, the first instalment of COVID Classical, playlists that explore the gamut of the emotions that you'll experience in this global crisis with some of the most soul-enriching classical music ever written. My name is Dane Lam, I'm an Australian conductor, and I am principal conductor of the Xi'an Symphony Orchestra in China. Apart from that, I conduct orchestras and with opera companies all over the world, except not so much at the present moment. Luckily, that has given me the time to curate these playlists for you. In a world where there is so much suffering and so much uncertainty, music has the power to comfort and inspire. And composers across the centuries have been pondering the very same kind of uncertainties. They've been pondering suffering and emotions that we're all feeling right now. So I'll be your guide through this music. I'll give you some of the background of the pieces, some of the historical context, some cool things to listen out for in the music, as well as a few personal anecdotes from my own musical journey. Given my area of expertise is that of an orchestral conductor and an opera conductor, most of the music that you'll hear in these playlists will be for large instrumental ensembles, i.e. orchestras, and for singers. It can be epic, intense, soulful, joyous, and much more. But I really hope that what you can do during this period of isolation is that you can carve out a chunk of stillness during your day so that you can be transported and guided through some of the most powerful music ever written. You'll find the Spotify link to the playlist in the video description below. And if you really like some of the tracks and some of the pieces, you can also support the performers. I've included Amazon links below as well. You can either purchase the entire album or smaller tracks from the albums, but it's great at this time where it's difficult for performers all over the world to support classical music. And a small disclaimer, I do get a small cut from any of the proceeds that have been purchased on Amazon below. But now, to the music and to the playlist. Our playlist for this week focuses on the emotion of hope. And that's an emotion that we are all going to need to draw upon over the coming weeks. We start our musical journey through hope, through the finale to Beethoven's one and only opera, Fidelio. Now, personally, I find it absolutely impossible to curate any playlist on hope without including Ludwig van Beethoven. For me, the one aspect of Beethoven's music that speaks most truly and fully to me is that there is a complete absence of any despair in any of his pieces that I know. Even if you think about when things seem very tense, when things seem very dire, there's always hope around the corner in Beethoven. And his story of Fidelio concerns the lengths that Leonora will go to save her beloved Florestan from a political prison by disguising herself as a prison guard. You'll hear the very finale of the opera when a chorus of prisoners sing for joy, blessing the day and blessing the hour of their freedom. After a quick fanfare in the whole orchestra, we get a jaunty, joyful, catchy little motif that builds and builds and builds. And this builds and builds and builds for much longer than you might expect. But the genius of Beethoven is it never gets repetitive, in fact, and it just drives us on inexorably towards the entrance of the chorus, screaming, shouting for joy. Now from Beethoven's time, we whiz over to our own, to a busy airport. It could be Heathrow, could be JFK, wherever you fly from. High-flying British composer Jonathan Dove has contributed several masterpieces to the opera repertory of our time. His 1998 opera, Flight, tells the story of a lone refugee stuck in the no-man's land of an airport departures terminal, and it actually is inspired by the same story that was the inspiration for the Tom Hanks movie, The Terminal. Airports, love them or hate them, are undoubtedly places of great commotion, bustle, industry, and energy, and you'll hear that in Jonathan's music. The rhythmic vitality is evident from the very first bars, when these insistent strings play a rhythmic ostinato over which are punctuated by these fanfares in the horns and the trumpets being passed between the two of them. And another effect that you can listen out for are these whizzing, stratospherically high sounds that are produced using a special technique on a string instrument called string harmonics. And of course, hope also comes from having a bit of fun, like, say, Getting your boogie on and dancing a bit? Contrary to all the pictures that circulate of Brahms as a portly, po-faced, bearded gent with a serious demeanour, he too loved to have a drink and a party. In fact, in his youth, Brahms was a pianist in brothels and beer halls just to earn a living, and I have it on very good authority, along the great big grapevine of classical music teachers that have come from Brahms' time to our time, that Brahms really loved a pint. And there's little music that is more full of this joy and party energy than his Hungarian dances. And I've chosen the most ebullient recording that I know of Brahms' sixth Hungarian dance. And it's a recording by Ivan Fischer and his Budapest Festival Orchestra. Why is it so good? Well, it's lively and it's full of spontaneity. And Ivan Fischer really brings the folk elements and the spontaneity and the improvisatory quality as if it was really being danced. If you listen closely, you'll hear that Fischer pulls around the tempo. Sometimes it's faster, sometimes it's slower. He might take a little bit of time over a really crunchy or funky chord, and it's really like it was being danced. From one life-affirming, folk-inspired dance to another, we now move to the third movement, the Juba dance from Florence Price's Fourth Symphony. Now, Florence Price is a composer who is deservedly having something of a revival of her vital music in the concert hall right now. She was a composer of African-American descent who made her entire career in the United States in the first half of the 20th century, including some of that time in the Jim Crow era South. She developed such a distinctive and compelling compositional voice that her first symphony was given its premiere by no less than the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. The Fourth Symphony was actually only rediscovered a few years ago when a family discovered 30-odd boxes of music in a newly purchased fixer-upper that they bought on the south side of Chicago. Its third movement is entitled Juba Dance, which comes from a vivacious African-American dance involving clapping and stomping, and came to the United States plantations by way of Angola and Congo. You'll hear the infectious rhythms from the outset, as well as the use of the pentatonic scale, which is a 5-note scale that's so redolent of folk music. A composer of our time, who also incorporates jazz elements into his music, is the British composer Will Todd, whose opera, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, based on the Lewis Carroll story, of course, I was fortunate enough to conduct at Opera Holland Park in London. The song you're going to hear from Will Todd's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is probably the real hit tune of the whole show. It's called I Flew High, and it's sung by Alice as she's lost and bewildered in Wonderland as everything has taken a turn for the worst. And she gains great consolation and hope from singing this song. Here it is, performed by some great friends of mine, soprano Fleur Wynne and conductor Matthew Waldron for Opera Holland Park. Synesthesia refers to the phenomenon where people see colours related to the music that they're hearing. American composer Michael Torke took this idea and wrote a series of colour music. Now, you can't help listening to his bright blue music without feeling uplifted by the explosion of this bright blue energy as the whole orchestra erupts in its joyful syncopations. And by syncopations, we mean that over these two main beats, ba-da-da, 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 over these two main beats, there are rhythms that are set in contradiction to those beats, creating a sort of a pulsation and a forward-driving ululation to the colour blue. What's not to love about a song that is literally entitled No Longer Sad? Non più mesta is the last song or aria from Rossini's comic opera La Cenerentola, or Cinderella. In it, our Cinderella, who is called Angelina, celebrates that she is no longer sad, sweeping cinders by the fireplace, as she's now found her Prince Charming. In his day, Rossini was much, much, much more famous than his contemporary, the last guy we heard, Beethoven, and his comic operas and his serious operas entertained audiences all over Europe. In this song, you'll hear his famous coloratura passages for mezzo-soprano, that is to say, these rapid, skillfully sung firework-like passages where the notes go up and down in rapid succession. I challenge you to listen to this and not be grinning ear to ear by the end. Messaien's Quartet for the End of Time awakens inside of us an entirely different kind of hope to the Rossini. It's the sort of hope that we humans can look directly into the face of utter despair, utter depravity and utter evil, and still turn to beauty and to goodness. Messaien was a devout Catholic, and he wrote this while he was a prisoner of war of the Nazis in the 1940s. It was performed in a concentration camp outside in the pouring rain and mud by fellow musicians who were also prisoners, and it was listened to with rapt attention by 400 other inmates. The term testament to the human spirit is bandied around so often, but if it ever did exist, this is the most appropriate instance in which to use it. So here's the final movement of the quartet, entitled Louange à l'immortalité de Jésus, or Praise to the Immortality of Jesus. And it's a violin solo with a very simple piano accompaniment. I couldn't resist staying with Mendelssohn, but this time for a quick sojourn to Italy in happier times. In his early 20s, as was customary amongst young gentlemen at the time in Europe, Mendelssohn took a grand tour of the continent, part of which took him to Italy. Now, he was absolutely besotted by the country and dedicated his Fourth Symphony to La Dolce Vita. For this first movement, I've chosen a recording by my late mentor, Maestro Kurt Masur. Now, Maestro Masur's rendition of this jaunty first movement is maybe a little steadier than you might have heard elsewhere, though Masur's Mendelssohnian pedigree was absolutely as good as it comes. He was, for more than 20 years, the General Music Director, the music director, the boss and the intendant of Mendelssohn's very own orchestra, the Leipzig Gewandhaus. For starters, Masur's slightly slower tempo allows the melody to sing in a very lyrical and Italianate way. And also at the end of this movement, there's what we call in music an accelerando, which is what it sounds like. The music accelerates gradually and over time. However, these recordings that start a bit too chipmunky ain't got nowhere to go at the end, and so it all bears out. We stay with the Italians for a classic exploration of that most hopeful of emotions, love. Puccini's La Boheme is one of the most beloved operas of all time, where the composer's Italian sensibilities for love were transported to Montmartre of the late 19th century. We come into the story at the duet, O soave fanciulla, O sweet little lady, when the Bohemian poet Rodolfo falls for his upstairs neighbour Mimi for the first time, and there's a whole game of candles being blown out and holding cold little hands. They fall rapturously in love. For me, La Boheme is one of the most perfect operas ever to be written. In its brevity, it still plumbs the depths of so many primal human emotions in soaring, probing music. You'll hear it too, sung by a young Luciano Pavarotti and Mirella Freni, singers at the very height of their powers when this recording was made. We stay with biblical themes that have inspired composers for centuries, with the final movement, the final monumental movement to Mahler's life-affirming Second Symphony, the Resurrection. For Mahler, who encountered many struggles early on in his life, grappling with death and disease of his close family, he was constantly searching for redemption and for new life and for a second chance. This vast symphony starts with the stench of death in a literal death march. Then there's the clarion call of the final trumpet from the book of Revelation and a meditation on eternal light. And finally this. After a frightening start, hushed strings start an ascending phrase of hope. However, stick through it until the very end. It's quite a long movement, about 30 minutes or so. But if you stick through to this, you'll hear the moment where the choir, which has been silent for the whole rest of the symphony and every other movement, the choir enters hushed and a cappella in German. Rise again, yes, rise again, will you, my dust. This is the seed of hope that instigates the resurgence against fear, against death, and for triumphant hope and life. So, as you all go about your changed lives this week, fighting against some of the fear that this virus might bring us, my fervent wish is that this playlist did give you some hope and will continue to give you hope over the week, drawing on the same sentiments that spurred on all the artists and all the composers that are featured in the list. If you did draw some inspiration from it, please hit subscribe, as there will be a new playlist for a new emotion every week. I also encourage you to click on the Spotify link to go straight to the playlist. As well, if you enjoy the recordings, feel free to purchase from the Amazon links below to support some of the artists featured here. Leave any thoughts you have in the comments section, and until next time, keep the music playing.